In March 1938, Nazi Germany conducted its Anschluss of Austria, annexing the country into the German Reich without ever firing a shot. On the morning of March 12th, the 8th Army of the German Wehrmacht crossed the German-Austrian border and met no resistance from the Austrian army. Adolf Hitler crossed the border that afternoon at Braunau, his birthplace, and the next day, the Anschluss was given immediate effect by law. In those 2 days, a course of events was set in motion that would forever change the world. George Spooner's world was horrifically changed. A 9-year-old Jewish boy living with his family in Vienna, Austria on those fateful days in March, George shares his story.
At the age of 9, the Nazis took over. And when I say Nazis, well, everyone thinks of Germans, but they weren't. They were the Austrians. The German troops did march in, and then the bullies took over, the Nazis took over. And Jewish life became very difficult. I was 9 years old at the time, and a 9-year-old kid is not going to be bothered too much. But I remember street beatings, molestations of young women, looting. This happened very early, happened in March. And I saw this. I saw this because I was able to. Nobody would bother with a little boy.
Give us, everybody, an idea about your family life, what it was like in Vienna at that period of time. There was a pretty large Jewish community.
Oh, the community in Vienna was about 10% of the population. Vienna is a city pretty much like St. Louis, an old river town on the Danube. If you have 10% of the population, you had probably, as a fact, you had probably 180,000 Jews in that area out of a population of approximately 2 million. I was born in Vienna. My father was born in Vienna. My grandfather was Austrian. We're Austrians. But when the Nazis took over, and we being Jews, that is exactly what you were not supposed to be.
We've got a picture that you gave us, which is in this book about Jewish life in Vienna in the 1930s. And this is your family, right?
This is my family picture.
You were an only child.
I was an only child. Life in Vienna was good. We had a full-time maid. My father was colorblind, so he couldn't drive a car, but we had a chauffeur with a card at his disposal at all times. Summers were spent away in the country. I went to good schools. I was taken care of. Good upper-class middle life. When the Nazis took over, the maid said she couldn't work for us anymore. So with reluctance and tears in her eyes, she left and she went back home. The chauffeur said he couldn't drive for us anymore because we were Jews. So there we were, no transportation. My mother's help was gone. That was very early. Those are little things that I remember.
Now, you went to school. You didn't go to a Jewish school growing up originally. You were in a school with just all kids, right?
All kids, neighborhood kids, neighbors, friends, the guys I grew up with. I'm 9 years old. I'm in 4th grade. School would start with the blessing, and we would recite the Lord's Prayer. I did not because I was Jewish. All the boys in the class would stand up and would recite the Lord's Prayer. Unser Vater, wer ist im Himmel, our Father who art in heaven, etc., etc. Then school would start. Within a matter of a couple of weeks, my friends, my school chums, 9 years old, would show up with short pants and brown shirts and little swastikas on their arms, maybe a little knife on their side. They were already Hitler youths, Youth for Hitler. They still recited the Lord's Prayer, but as soon as they finished the Lord's Prayer, they raised their hand in a salute to Hitler and pledged their allegiance to Hitler. And then school would start. When I was 9, I went across the street from where I lived to play with a friend of mine. And my mother told me to be careful. And as I was about to step up to the curb, sidewalk from the curb, I was approached by 3 Hitler youths. And they were probably 10 or 12 years old. And as I wanted to get up, I saw them coming towards me, so I went left. And when I moved to the left to get up on the sidewalk, they moved to the left. Then I moved to the right, and they followed me again. I had no choice. I had to meet them head on. And I did. And they looked down at me, and one of them said, "Are you a Jew?" I'm 9 years old. I didn't want to be beaten up. I wet my pants, I admit to that. And I denied my faith. I said, no, I'm not a Jew. One of them said, "Oh, he's a Jew, all right." Another one said, let him go. They probably spotted somebody else down the block. And I ran to my friend's father's house, who took me by the hand and led me back across the street to safety of where I lived. And two things I have never forgotten. Two things I learned, which I maintain to this day. Number one, I am a Jew. Most importantly. Number two, it's bad being a Jew. To this day, these are two things that have stayed with me.
Thank you for that, George. And hopefully many members of our student audience and the audience here are aware of an event that occurs in November of 1938,
Yes.
Kristallnacht,
Yes.
which obviously was a significant event in the history of what became the Holocaust, and in particular in your life.
Kristallnacht was the breaking of the glass, the Kristallnacht. In November of 1938, every Jewish house of worship in the city of Vienna was destroyed. Now bear in mind, there were over 90, I think 92 houses of worship, including some street front synagogues, as well as big sanctuaries that had been there for decades and decades. They were all looted and destroyed. If you're in a Jewish neighborhood, they were burnt to the ground. If it was a non-Jewish neighborhood, it was just destroyed because they were afraid they might burn the house of the neighbors who were not Jewish. Each one was destroyed. The one that I went to, the sanctuary, and there's a picture of it, sat over 1,000 people. Two balconies, women and men were separated. Women had their balconies. Over 1,000 people sat there. It was burned to the ground. I was there. I saw it smoldering. I saw the prayer books being burned on the street.
A significant event, obviously, in your life because your family's history changes immediately at that moment in time.
My father was arrested the following day, and he and 30,000 other Jewish men were arrested, most of them from Austria, because the largest Jewish population that was left was in Austria. And Hitler wanted to get rid of them. Get rid of the Jews, that's what he said, before the final question came in. My father wound up in a concentration camp in Dachau, the first concentration camp built by the Germans. And you can imagine my mother, her friends, where's my husband, where's my brother, you know, where's my father? They were gone. In some instances, it took weeks. My mother found out within 2 weeks. We got a postcard. My father saying that he was in Dachau, the block number and the cell number, and that we knew he was alive. Hitler wasn't killing the Jews yet at that particular time. However, of the 30,000 men that were picked up, most people don't know this, only 90% made it to the camps. 10% never even made it to the camps. Old men had heart attacks. There were beatings. There were shootings. People tried to escape. They were killed. 90% only made it to the concentration camps. And of those, only 90% survived, my father being one of them. He was there for 3 months, and in the 90-day period, he lost 90 pounds in weight. So you know what he had to eat, very little. The brutality of what was going on, he told me about all of those things. But I had to do it later when I was able to understand it.
You obviously were afraid. Your mother was very afraid. Your father's in Dachau.
Right.
And she learns there is a thing called the Kindertransport.
Immediately after that, the English, the only people who opened their hearts, realized what was going on and helped in rescuing. Of the 1.5 million children that were killed in the Holocaust, 1.5 million children that were murdered, 10,000 survived because the English said, we've got to save some of these kids. And they instituted what they called the Kindertransport, a transport of children. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the 10,000 children that went on the Kindertransport and was sent to England. I'm 10 years old and I'm settled by myself.
This is 1939?
This is 1938, December of 1938.
And so, we've got a picture that we can share. You don't originally go to a family, you're in some sort of like youth camp?
First they sent you a camp, and from a camp you were sent to either family, another camp, because there were so many children coming in. And this is a picture of the summer of 1939, before the start of the Second World War, where I was in a town called Ramsgate, which is on the seashore, a sea resort. And I was there in a Quaker home, a group home, with about 8 or 10 other children who they took care of us at that particular time. I'm 10 years old and I'm on that picture. I was with group homes. I was sent out to families, to various camps, wherever it was convenient at that time, because children were still coming in. I bless the English people. They were the only ones that said we have to take these children unequivocally. And they did rescue 10,000 of us. And I, fortunately, was one of them.
And eventually your mother gets to England as well?
My mother, yes, my mother got herself a passport. Very fortunately, she put want ads in the foreign newspapers offering her services as a cook. Here's a woman who had a maid and a chauffeur. She's now going to be a cook. She got a letter back from England, from a family, that said, we'll take you on as a cook, Mrs. Spooner, provided you can get here. On the strength of that, she was able to get permission from the English embassy to come to England. And that enabled her to get her passport. She got this before I went to England. So she had her passport. She had a passport. I'm in England. My father's still in the concentration camp. My mother, a strong woman, got my father out of the concentration camp. My father had been an all-star athlete, played for the Austrian national team, was a soccer player. He was also a veteran of World War I, fought for the Kaiser at that time, had a bunch of medals from the Kaiser on the other side. And on the strength of that, they let him out of the concentration camp, provided he would leave Austria within 45 days.
And so he was also able to get to England?
He got to England because the English, once again, opened their hearts. They said, we've got to rescue some of these men, but you have to set limits. So they said, we'll take some of these men, provided they're younger than 45 years old. My father qualified just by a year. And they rescued several thousand men. 3,000 or 4,000 men were rescued. And they came to England. So the three of us all wound up in England independently, which was like 1,000,000 to 1 shot that the three of us would make it.
And when you arrive in America, you arrive where?
Well, it was wartime. We arrived the end of April, beginning of May of 1940. And we left England. We had my uncle, my father's brother, got us a sponsor, which means somebody who vouches for you, that you're not going to be a burden on society. And they vouched for us to come to the States, and we got on the ship, the Holland American line, the Volendam. And if any of you have ever taken a cruise, you know the first thing you do is lifeboat drill. We're out halfway across the Atlantic, and we're on a Dutch ship, and it's at that time that Hitler invaded Holland. And we're no longer on a neutral ship. We could have been torpedoed. I still remember the Dutch sailors going over the side and scaffolding and overpainting the flag, the Dutch flag, which was painted on both sides of the ship so that the U-boats would see there was a neutral ship. We're not on a neutral ship anymore. We could have been torpedoed. The trip itself would take quite some time to tell you about the trip, but it took us 18 days to come across. We made it.
And now you've lived in the country since then, married, kids?
Right, grandfather, and lived here in St. Louis over 50 years.